or not to cut? That's the question we posed to you this morning on our poll. You can participate in that poll and let us know, what do you think? Now, South Africa still reels from several brutal rapes and murder cases against women and children in recent weeks. And in light of Child Protection Week, should the country be considering harsher punishment for convicted rapists and paedophiles? Chemical castration was recently added into Indonesia's laws, as their president believes that this is the only way to reduce their high statistics. You heard it earlier with Eben when he spoke to the High Commissioner there. But what rights do convicted sexual offenders have? And would South Africa's constitution allow such a law to be implemented? Now, to find out more, we're joined here in studio by the communications coordinator at the South African Human Rights Commission, Mr. Gushwell Brooks. A very good morning to you, Mr. Brooks, and welcome.
Good morning to you, Alice, and good morning to the people watching it on.
You heard the High Commissioner a little bit earlier. Evan was speaking to him. Your thoughts as the Human Rights Commission on the introduction and adoption of chemical castration in Indonesia?
Well, I think one needs to set out something, and there's a very important issue that you raised right at the beginning. What rights do convicted criminals have in South Africa? And quite frankly, the Bill of Rights, our Constitution, Chapter 2 of our Constitution applies in this particular instance. And of course, because people are convicted and they're imprisoned, some of those rights have been limited. So, for example, freedom of movement, because you can't say that, look, I'm in prison and I'm going to go fishing this weekend. That's not a possibility. Some of those rights are limited, but there are certain rights that you cannot take away or limit in any way. So, for example, the right to life, the right to dignity, the right to equality. These are the rights that are contained within the Constitution that, in essence, we can't affect. Now, I just want to set the people at home at ease and make them realize, because ordinarily when we have this conversation, people say, well, you're extending more rights to criminals. Criminals have too many rights. That is not the issue at play. We're not suggesting that people should be protected and mollycoddled. But at the same time, there's a couple of things that we need to ask ourselves. Is chemical castration necessarily the most effective form of punishment? And second to that, does it conform to our set of standards in terms of our constitutional rights that we've extended to people? And the answer to that, to both those questions in this particular instance, would ordinarily be no.
But if criminals don't comply and they know they no longer fear jail time, what are the alternatives? And what should we do? Should that conversation maybe be part and parcel of what we are discussing? Well, chemical castration?
I think the important bit is exactly what you said there. The point of origin is that we should have people that are guilty of these crimes being fearful of the possibility that they're going to find themselves imprisoned. So which means that we need better policing. We need definitely need better socialization of our men within our communities and our young boys, so that they understand that this type of behavior is a serious and egregious act against any particular human being. And beyond that, we need to actually see these people being convicted. I mean, just last year, the last financial year, 2015 into 2016, we saw approximately 43,000 rapes. 43,000 rapes that were reported. Out of those, we saw, during the same period, we only saw 800 convictions in terms of life sentences, people being given life sentences. That is a 2% success rate. That is a shocker. That needs to be addressed rather than looking at the other extreme. Because what is the point? And not to say that this should be allowed in the first instance, but what is the point of having chemical castration in place when you have a 2% success rate in terms of how many people you're convicting and actually putting behind bars?
The South African Constitution, would it allow such a conversation to extend itself into the public and to make their voices heard in relation to what they feel should be the ultimate punishment for pedophiles and rapists?
So there's a couple of things that we need to take into account. First and foremost, we have the Constitutional Court case of S versus Makwaneane. Excuse me for that. The case that actually took away the death penalty in South Africa. And the key issue that came up there is the fact that despite the nature of the person's crime or how severe the crime is, when applying punishment through, through the criminal justice system, the dignity of the individual needs to be taken into account. That is a constitutional right that you have in Section 10 that we can't take away. Of course, life also played a serious role because that was the issue around the death penalty. But the key issue in this particular instance, what applies is the dignity. Apart from that, South Africa has signed on to numerous conventions. One of them, in 1998, we signed on to the Convention in the Prevention of Torture, inhumane, as well as unusual punishment. And that already dictates that we can't participate in certain forms of punishment, including torture. And this, if you look at this, this is an inhumane form of punishing someone. And I saw that, yes, there's this process that people go through. They have to take a tablet every week. But the key question, or an injection, but the key question that we need to ask ourselves is, even the narrative around rape and some of these sexual violence, is it sexually driven? Is that where it stops?
But some of these countries that offer chemical castration offer it as an alternative, as an option. Should that not be part and parcel of our discussion then?
Well, the key question we have to ask ourselves, again, going back to the rights as contained within the Constitution. I mean, recently we heard that there was the unfortunate practice where some women in South Africa, for example, went in for an operation. They were found to be HIV positive, or the doctor knew that they were HIV positive, and these women were then, in turn, sterilized. And, you know, a lot of people would turn around and say, yeah, well, at the time, it wasn't safe for women to have children that were HIV positive. But you took the choice away from that particular individual. And isn't part of our prison system to rehabilitate some of these people? And we do have many people that have been convicted of rape, go to prison and return back to society. And some of them, not all of them, agreed, but some of them actually return to normal lives, where they have families and they take some form of responsibility. And we know that to be the case. Imagine taking that choice away from that individual at that particular stage. So it's not a case of placing, and I really want to stress this, I don't want to place criminals that have been found guilty of rape in cotton wool and say, shame, we really need to protect these people. They've committed horrible crimes, they need to be punished for it, and they need to be rehabilitated by the prison system.
What is the process, if it's going to happen, what is the process relating to official discussions and decisions on this type of punishment for criminals, and what is the sort of pattern or discussions that need to happen within Parliament, within the public forums, in order to perhaps get to a point where we can discuss castration?
Well, what's going to happen is it's going to go through the usual legislative process, where obviously Parliament has to introduce the bill has to be voted on, but prior to that there also has to be public participation. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be multiple civil society organizations that would give input. Of course, the South African Human Rights Commission would also give input into a bill of that nature. Once the bill has been passed, the next question that would, in all likelihood, that would have to be answered, and the test that would be applied is it actually constitutional? And that it will be taken to the Constitutional Court. And of course, the test there would be in terms of our definition, the constitutional definition of rights such as dignity, and maybe some other rights contained within the Bill of Rights. It would be tested up against that. And I find it very difficult, very difficult. I don't want to make predictions. The South African Human Rights Commission wouldn't want to make predictions on this. But it would be very difficult to pass constitutional muster on this one.
Is there any countries internationally which you are aware of where chemical castration was actually working? Is there statistics available?
There's a difficulty. I mean, you read up on it, and there's varying studies and issues related. I mean, I was listening to one of the tweets that Eben was mentioning there, where this particular person said, well, it makes people angry. Unfortunately, what some studies suggest is because there is no sexual response, it generates anger. So yes, you might drop off the testosterone, which we tend to blame for the anger. But, and this is why I said it's very important that we have to understand our narrative around rape. Is it just sexual perversion, as people would like to believe, or is it actually something insidious and far more serious that we need to look at, where it's power? So for example, you'll have many men that say that they're not homosexual, or that they do not find other men attractive, but they rape men in prison and within communities as a form of dominance and power. And all too often we find that this also happens, where someone says that, well, she thought that she was too good looking or too special for us to date, and therefore I did this. It's not because of some sexual attraction alone, but rather a form of power play. And what happens is that you find these people that are chemically castrated in some instances, you know, the anger, that power play, that ability to assert themselves over someone actually gets worse.
Now, chemical castration is not permanent, as we just saw in relation to what we were discussing earlier. So is that still impeding on somebody's human rights as an individual if it's not permanent?
The key question that we have to ask ourselves, and that's what I was fascinated about in the previous conversation, is let's assume someone has been in prison for 20 years for the crime of rape. And during those 20 years, they're going through this chemical castration process. Now they're released. They're free to go home. They're released back into society. And this particular person can't be continually punished once those 20 years have passed. So what is the point after a month of being back out in society and the person is fully functional again on a sexual level? What was the point of having chemically castrated this individual in the first place? Because technically you place someone in prison to protect the rest of society from that individual, is it not so? And now that they're back in society, the very weapon that they used in committing their crime is fully functional once more.
Mr. Brooks, we're out of time, really, but I just want to ask you briefly, it's Child Protection Week this week. Anything particular the Human Rights Commission is going to focus on?
So the South African Human Rights Commission is doing quite a number of things. One of the most exciting things that we're involved in is looking at giving children the opportunity to understand, their human rights from a constitutional perspective, and that's obviously a major project that we're involved in. The other important thing is also to help children be able to lodge their complaints and to make our spaces. As you know, we have 9 offices throughout the various provinces throughout the country, making those child-friendly, making those child-safe, and giving young people the opportunity not only to lodge their complaints, but also to learn and understand what their human rights entail. So it's a massive thing. I will definitely tell you more. Hopefully you call me back for another conversation.
We will definitely do that, because it's not just about rights, it's also about responsibilities, isn't it?
Indeed, indeed.
Mr. Brooks, I thank you so much for your time and joining us here. But that's why we're asking you that question. That was the Communications Coordinator at the South African Human Rights Commission, Mr. Gushwell Brooks. So that's why we're asking you that question in relation to Child Protection Week.